Hey, Mike.
Hey, Bob. What day is it?
Uh, it doesn't matter.
It
Okay,
doesn't matter.
we have a special SquadCast for everyone this night. It's some night in October, but we're coming to you live. But we're gonna this is a recorded session that we're gonna have. We have a great interview guest tonight, and we needed to get it in this way, so we weren't he wasn't able to fit into our live session. So we're gonna record this tonight. We're gonna have a great conversation with Danny Fingeroth. Um, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Can I do a public service announcement first?
Absolutely.
I do this when I'm like really broadcasting like rock and roll music and stuff, and I've
Sure.
done this all my life, so I might as well do it here too. This coming weekend after this weekend, is the end of daylight saving time.
Ah,
So
important.
don't screw up. Mess with your clocks. Most of them self-adjust now anyway, but be aware your car clock probably isn't, and fix it. I don't know whether you turn it forward or turn it backward. On Culture Squad, we do both all the time.
Right.
we,
We talk about the future, we go backwards.
yeah,
There's a whole generation of people who don't even know what that's like because their phone's the only clock they have and it automatically does it for them.
yeah, yeah, that's true. And I'll tell you something. The thing I like the most when I first got my iPhone was the fact that I didn't have to change the time ever. It would always just do it. Now I got their watch. Their watch is, I think, is just wonderful. I know you don't like Apple, and we'll get into that one of these days.
Well,
I'm not as big a sycophant as I used to be, but the fact that I never have to mess with my watch or my phone or any of that, that's great.
yeah. Well, my watch does, adjusts for me too. So,
Oh, I'm
and it's
not
not,
saying that
that's all
Apple
right. That's all
invented
right.
time.
It's all right. Apple invented time.
Yeah, I had lunch yesterday with a gentleman, drummer, rock and roll drummer, who was an engineer at Apple for years and years and years. Worked on an infinite loop and stuff. I got all these inside stories. It was great.
All right. So, uh, coming up, that is, it just keeps getting later and later until the point that we're not even going to change time. But let's stop talking about time.
Okay.
We are, we're coming to you. We will be talking about some of the things. Let's put it this way: we already have talked about some of the things that we're going to talk about now because it'll be in the future for us, but it's in the past. We're doing this whole time thing today. But one of the big things that's gone on since we've been on the air, and you and I have talked is New York Comic Con, and that will, if you haven't seen the live broadcast that we did a couple of days ago with Becky Cloonan, you should go back and check that out because we talked about that a little bit. We want you to check that out. Also, we want you to take this opportunity for you to like and follow this account on YouTube, because when you do that, you'll know that when we go live, which is pretty much every Tuesday night, and we have a great slate of guests lined up for the next several weeks. So please make sure you do that.
Maybe even for just about the rest of the year.
Yeah, we are packed. We have great guests lined up. People are wanting to come on the show. We're looking forward to having them on. I'm getting to the point where I'm planning out several weeks in advance. So that's great for us. I want to get to our guest and bring him in as quick as we can and talk about the stuff we have. So I want to do that right now. We have tonight writer, editor, author, Danny Fingeroth, and we're going to bring him in right now. Hey, Danny, how are you?
I guess I've just had a preview of my in memoriam at the San Diego Con when I go. It was really.
I don't think it'll be that long.
I will take the opposite.
If I get one,
there will be plenty more. There's plenty of time to get to that.
Just make sure you die in a year where that's unique. Because if like millions of people have been dying that year, then you only get so much time.
I know. Well, I'll do the best I can to,
You've always got to call your shots.
Nobody can quite do it like Keith.
Really, it depends when I'm going to actually fake my own death for the insurance. That I have to see when the investment climate is best for that. Hi guys, thank you.
Thanks for being here. We're really excited to have you here. You have a new book coming out. That's the main reason we want to talk to you. Besides the other great work you've done for comics and comics history as well. This book, Jack Ruby, The Many Faces of Oswald's Killer.
This book? Okay.
That one? Yep, that one.
Awesome, yeah.
I've had a chance to look at some of it. I haven't read all of it, but I have looked through it, and man, I'm very excited to get into it. This does represent like a departure from your past works. What about this topic brought you to write about this book, or to read this book?
That is a very good question, and it started. I'm of a certain age, much like you fellows. I was 10 years old when Kennedy was assassinated, and when Ruby killed Oswald. I was not obsessed with it. It was too big for me to deal with. It was just way too insane. And also, when something like that happens when you're 10, you just kind of go, well, I guess that's how the world is. I guess people are going to get shot once in a while, and they will be present, So
we quickly found out that's true.
Yes, we did, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think the world had probably been like that before. Just we were 10 years old. We were not born
That's
at all.
right.
We didn't. And
right.
Also, there was not 24-hour. I think the big thing was there was not 24-hour news coverage of the the shooting of Franz Joseph in World War One. But anyway, did I get the name right? Was that Franz Joseph? Was that the?
Yes.
Okay, you're $10 at work, folks. So
yeah, they didn't have a camera on it. Damn.
They were watching the choreography elsewhere. About 12 years ago, I decided I wanted, when I was coming up on the 50th anniversary, I decided, gee, this would be an interesting graphic novel, as Mike well knows, and went through a guy named Howard Zimmerman, who some of you may know from his work on Starlog and at Byron Price. Howard was and is a packager. He put me together with an artist named Rick Geary, and I said, gee, I want to do a non-superhero graphic novel. I want to do one of those historic graphic novel-y kind of things. And nobody seems to be doing anything about the Kennedy assassination. Maybe there'd be a market. And so I've started working on it. And ultimately, to make a long story short, it was hard to find somebody who would pay Rick to spend 2 years drawing this. Rick is famous these days for doing a lot of true murder stuff that he publishes himself, and he's great. And it would have been so. I did a lot of research, and I found that what's the Danny Fingeroth angle on the Kennedy assassination? If I may speak about myself in the third person, if Danny is not somebody who was really obsessed with the assassination, oh, okay, it's this really weird Jewish American guy, Jack Ruby. And if you've followed my work, you know that that's sort of Stan Lee and just the origins of Jews and superheroes and comics. And that was what kind of called out to me. So that was the beginning of the interest in Ruby. And then when you start developing an interest, which by now has blossomed into an obsession, you just pick up everything in the culture that mentions not just the Kennedy assassination, but Jack Ruby in particular. I mean, I think among the legacies of Jack Ruby is the idea that when anybody turns up mysteriously dead, somebody always says, "Who is this Jack Ruby?" It just has become, and so I researched it, and so I had all this reading and interviewing and visiting the various sites in Dallas. And so about 2 or 3 years ago, I said, now that I'd written this biography of Stan Lee, I said to my agent, "Do you think we could sell this now that I'm a biographer and I have written other books, could we sell this as a prose biography?" And gosh darn it, we did, to Chicago Review Press, right in Mike's hometown. Bob, where are you? Are you in Chicago?
No, I'm in Baltimore.
In Baltimore, right?
And I grew up in Jersey, so I'm a mid Atlantic guy.
Atlantic guy. So you're on East Coast time. So you're right in the sense that it's not about comics, So we will see if I am able to establish credibility and actually sell books as somebody about something not comics. This is, in my own, what I laughingly refer to as my career. This is kind of an interesting pivotal point. Where I think I did a pretty good job, although it certainly was different in a lot of ways than researching Stan Lee. But so anyway, so that's the origin of it, and that's the ironic thing is that I started out when I graduated high school and started in college. I was an English major, and I've spent years trying to avoid being an English major. That was sort of, I dropped out of school. I changed majors. I did all sorts of crazy stuff. I went to the comic book business, just trying to escape my fate of an English major. And yet for the past 20 or so years, I guess being a comic writer and editor would be an English major's fate too. But somehow now I'm living the life of an English major, which isn't so bad.
First of all, an English major should be lucky enough to get work in comics. That's just English major is not like top on everybody's list of people they want to hire. I don't think people speak English anymore.
Well, I became a film major, which is another language, but it. Well, I was going to say it's a side discussion, but I have a feeling this might be the place for side discussions.
Sure.
The question, it's like when you see movie reviews and they neglect to mention that there's any visual aspect to the movie that they're reviewing. They're reviewing it as if it was a novel. I mean,
right?
So, but you can that happens a lot in comics too, where people approach it as if there was no visuals. So it depends who's hiring. I think maybe Marvel, which had a tradition of a guy who was a word guy and not an artist as the editor-in-chief, I think maybe they tended more towards English majors. Maybe DC having more of a history of artists as editors. I don't know. Is that a theory? It might.
Hard to say. I mean, the editors who made DC what we think of as DC were writers, Mort Weisinger and Julie Schwartz, and they were also science fiction agents, which I think also helped.
Yeah.
But all those guys came out of the pulps, so they came out of a tradition of storytelling, and that's what comics is all about, and that's what your story is all about.
Well, thank you.
I'm gonna side with Danny on this a little bit, because my generation of DC was guided by Dick. Right. He was an artist.
Dick and Joe Kubert.
Yeah, exactly. I mean that.
And Joe Orlando.
Sure. Right. And I've heard, I had so many conversations I've had recently about people talking about Joe and how I know, Mike, you said something, but I've had some conversations in New York, or I talked to some of the older guys who were like, just having the opportunity to talk to Joe Orlando was worth its weight in gold.
Absolutely.
But like I said, I think I think that the storytelling aspect of DC was a little bit different because with the change to when Julie left and Dick took over editorial, the way that things were kind of they evolved graphically, I think was very interesting. It's kind of the conversation you and I were having earlier, where I think DC was first to embrace different stylistic things than Marvel was, especially in the 80s.
Well, they had to because Marvel was eating their lunch, but also they deserved to have to go through that because in the 50s and 60s, DC was absolutely convinced that they were the only people in the world who knew how to make comics. And for a while in the 50s, well, nobody else was making comics, so okay. But after that, like, for example, right around the time they started Fantastic Four #1, that proved to be a fallacy. DC still didn't get that point. When I started working there, Fantastic Four had been around for 15 years, and there were people at DC who still thought Marvel was a fad.
Well,
I'm serious.
To bring it more current, only 30 years ago. So, Image Comics, I mean, as by the name, that was, I have no idea what those guys studied in school, but certainly their emphasis was on the visual.
Right.
And anyway, this is 20 digression, but it's just funny that I'm now doing what I set out to do, then purposely took a detour of writing books and researching and studying, and I'm kind of back full circle, and it ain't so bad. Was that answering your question?
Yeah.
No, sure. No, you didn't come close.
How long did it take you to write this book or research? Like, how long have you been actively saying, like, I'm going to do this and been working?
That's always a trick question with writing books, because how much time was I actually sitting at a desk writing this book? I don't know. Maybe 6 months to a year, but then how much time did I spend writing different drafts of the graphic novel? Another 6 months to a year. How much time was it just in my, in the back of my mind, marinating? I mean, and then look, I mean, I sort of, while I didn't consider myself somebody obsessed with the Kennedy assassination, I did live through it, and
Sure.
and saw it on TV, and so I mean, I can think back to just different parts of my life where it became part of the vocabulary. Like we were saying about Ruby in particular, the Kennedy assassination in general has just become part of the background noise of modern life. So I had done a lot of the research, years ago. Then I did, then when, and then I again went through several versions of a proposal. So that's an impossible. This is different. Writing a book like this is certainly different than getting an assignment to write an issue of Spider-Man, and it's due in 2 weeks, and so I can tell you it took me 2 weeks. This, I'd say actively writing this book about 8 months. I'd say,
Right.
With a
on the other hand, it took you your whole life.
Well, that's it. That's the answer to every author, right?
That's true. The one thing that I need to insert here, I feel a need to insert, is that I'm 3 years older than you, and I'm about 100 years older than Bob.
Right.
And when the minute that Kennedy was assassinated, Earth stopped. Now, younger folk, meaning almost everybody, probably remember 9/11. Earth stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. Nothing else was talked about. Nothing else was done. There was nothing else on television. You couldn't go out to restaurants were closed, And I'm not just talking about like in New York during 9/11. I'm talking about the whole damn country. And America came to an absolute dead stop. The only thing you could hear was the sound of Barry Goldwater's presidential aspirations plummeting. That was it. And all of us were obsessed with it because we don't know shit about really what happened with Kennedy. We know lots of stuff, but there's no jigsaw puzzle that's been put together, no matter whose version you believe.
There's many that have put together. Just no.
That's right. But
Human-
Jack Ruby. Well, we'll get to that. Jack Ruby. That's a whole other matter. We know who killed Oswald. We saw it
But on live TV and again and
on
again.
live TV, and for some reason the newscasters didn't say, "Holy shit!" That's all they should have said. They should have just screamed that over and over and over again, because that's what the rest of us were doing, watching them.
I'd say that there's a difference between 9/11. I know what you mean. I mean, in terms of a shattering event where you're living through history.
Right.
And the thing that I was too dumb and maybe too young to think about when Kennedy was shot was, I wonder if the Russians did it and we're in World War III. I didn't think of that. But, but living in New York City during 9/11, my question and everybody's question that day and going forward was, are we next? This happened, I lived in Manhattan. This took place 5 miles from my house. What's going to happen when Kennedy was shot and when Oswald was shot, I didn't think, am I next? That was not my
right.
So at least for those of us living in New York and maybe near the Pentagon and
Sure. Boston. And in Boston.
And in Boston, right.
That's right. People forget about that. There were people from Boston on those planes. They left from Boston.
Right. I think that was a crucial difference.
Also in New York, you and I think Bob probably did too. We all knew people who lived a lot closer.
Oh yeah.
To what they call Ground Zero. Unfortunately,
I was in South Perry, so I was
where,
and I walked through the dust that day.
Yeah.
So, it's a different thing. I would compare, like, for my generation, the Challenger was a big thing. It was a thing that happened that you didn't expect, and your faith in something changed.
Yeah, it's like Pearl Harbor. It's like what my parents, at least, and that generation told me about Pearl Harbor. Now that happened 9 years before I was born, so I wasn't there for the emotions of it. But we had radio in those days, and if you want, you can actually hear tapes of the radio broadcasts that happened the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed. And we have these defining moments. Everybody has these. All societies have these defining moments. Where were you when Pearl Harbor got it? When JFK got it? When RFK got it? When Dr. King got it? So on and so forth. Where were you? When Hamas attacked Israel. I mean, it's those folks, at least. All those folks there have the right to say, where is this going to go? Because it happens every day. For us, every 10, 20 years.
But like I said, the Kennedy thing, I didn't feel personally menaced by it. I felt shattered, shaken. It was very, when I was researching both this and the Stan Lee book, I wanted to see if there was any real mention in the comic books of the Kennedy assassination, and I couldn't find any. I mean, when the story needed a president of the United States, it just went from Kennedy to Johnson. But there was no. I don't even remember a mention of the bullpen bulletins, the letters pages.
No, I think the time lag which was greater in those days, between when you actually produce the material and when people will be able to read it. The time lag was longer then, and I suspect there was a sense of optimism there, like, we're not going to write about this because by the time it's in print, it's all going to be different. And of course, sadly, it wasn't.
Yeah.
You're just sort of. It was not an instant world. It was just faster than my parents' world was. which was faster than their parents' world was.
One of the things I think that is makes Ruby a little bit more interesting or different, let's say. Like, people weren't watching Kennedy in Dallas on that day, not the whole world, but the whole country was watching when Ruby killed Oswald. So that was a thing. Like, nobody was expecting that, and all of a sudden something happened. Just like when people, like I said, the Challenger, nobody was we were all watching that. That was a thing that people were just watching on TV, expecting the normal thing to happen.
Keep in mind, I'm sorry, Danny, go away.
You are quite mind,
we hadn't seen Lee Harvey Oswald really before that moment, and quite frankly, we out there in TV land only saw Lee Harvey Oswald alive for a few minutes. So this was a big deal. Watching him leave, being transported, was a big deal.
We've seen Oswald, but there have been a couple of short impromptu press conferences, but
nothing serious, nothing big. And you want to, at that moment in time, you wanted to see who we are told had killed the president.
Well, yeah, but when you look back on both the Challenger and Oswald and Ruby,
yeah,
in respect, nobody should have been surprised. I mean,
right?
I've gotten used to it, but still, sending human beings up into space on top of like 1 million tons of jet fuel is dangerous, and dragging a guy accused of killing the president through a room full of people, any one of whom could have been and apparently was carrying a gun. You look, well, of course that was dangerous. That was, why would they have done, both those things. But yes, because we want a regular world. You want a world that's predictable. You want a world that doesn't erupt into craziness like that. But looking back, those were both fraught.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
What did you leave this project changed from? Like, from when you started and you said, this is the thing, I'm gonna approach it from Ruby's side of things. What things changed you from one to the end?
I never claimed that I was going to be the guy to solve the Kennedy assassination.
Sure.
Smarter people than I have tried, and they all think they've succeeded. But I went in. I think I had a more definite theory of Ruby. Maybe not going in, but after doing a bunch of research and interviewing, I thought he wanted to be the Jew that killed the guy that killed the president, and then commit what they call suicide by cop. Because once you do that, how could you not then be shot? As was proved several years later in Godfather 2, when Hyman was shot. So that's what I thought. His life was in shambles, and he very much identified as Jewish. He thought that he was very sensitive to any hint of anti-Semitism. Apparently, he was right. So I thought that's what he wanted to go out as a hero, and do public relations for the Jews. Oh, look, a Jewish guy killed this guy who killed the president.
So that's interesting.
I am sure that's part of it
anymore. I think it's probably part of it, but I don't feel as ironclad about that. What I found, and people have said this to me about historical research in general, the more I research, the less sure I am. In the book, I lay out a bunch of different possible scenarios. I speak to Ruby's family members. I speak to different, my big coup, if you will. I spoke to Ruby's rabbi, who, the movie Weekend at Bernie's, starring Jonathan Silverman. Jonathan Silverman's father was Jack Ruby's rabbi.
What?
And the guy just died like 6 months ago or less.
That's crazy.
Somebody
had to be.
Huh?
Somebody
Well,
had to be.
yeah, but it doesn't have to be somebody. It doesn't have to be Jonathan Silverson.
Well, but I mean, the way I figure that worked is after Dallas, he was so burned out, he moved to a pulpit in L.A. So he,
Okay.
because I used to joke, my joke used to be that he became Buddy Hackett's rabbi, but it turned out he became Buddy Hackett's rabbi, and said, so, um, so I knew this guy was part of the story, and I ended up buying two copies of his memoir because I lost one, and on Amazon, it's like, oh, I have to spend another $4 on this guy's memoir, I was put in touch. Friends of friends put me in touch with him, or friends of relatives, or something. And I'm interviewing the guy. I forget the sequence, but somewhere in there he says to me, "Would you like to see my notes on when I visited Jack in prison every other day for 4 months?" I go, "Yeah." I wouldn't
say no to questions like that.
So I had those notes to work from and to intercut with everything that was going on in the trial and in the country, and so that's sort of a big part of it. Again, I don't even remember what the question was, if there was a question, or if I just started spontaneously spouting off.
So you went into it with one particular, like he wanted to be the Jewish hero for killing.
Yeah, and I went into it. He's this shrouded figure. I mean, really, I think there's a certain way that if you get into his life, then you are suddenly opening up these anti-Semitic cans of worms, and I think that's why. I think that may be why he's been ignored. I think it was just too unpleasant for people to want to deal with,
He was an unpleasant man.
He was unpleasant. He was unpleasant, but he knew it's a weird life. He was most likely mobbed up. To what degree, we don't know. He was very violent, but there's no record of him actually having killed anybody else. I've seen a lot of, even you read obviously read a lot of books, a lot of research. He's always threatening people, but there's no other story about Jack Ruby actually killing anybody.
But I've known that type, particularly since he spent part of his life growing up where my parents grew up, and I knew a lot of people from that neighborhood. And that was a very mobbed up neighborhood. I know that people don't think of old Jewish neighborhoods in America being mobbed up, but that was very, very mobbed up.
I think any poor ethnic neighborhood is going to have, a great breeding ground for criminals.
For some reason, because we do indulge in our own stereotype, the Chicago Jews controlled Chicago gambling. They really had their finger on that. So you're dealing with Tony Accardo and all of those guys, and for Jack to have had any part of that, he was mobbed up. Does that mean that he went to the Klan meetings? No, not necessarily. However, and this is where your theory and my theory differ a little tiny bit, I think those guys are, and I've known a few, were always trying to prove themselves to the mob, to the the lieutenants, to the capos, and you say he wanted to be the Jewish wrath of vengeance, which is redundant, and I agree. But I also think he was trying to impress Sam Giancana.
That that has validity. I can't say no. Whether it's not a step. There's so much stuff that's not every book. Look, many books for all sorts of reasons have theories. Well, and have views of the assassination that their authors seem to believe are the only possible narrative and the only possible motivation. I've yet to read a book, whether by crazy people or sane people, that don't have the phrase or some version of, "It only stands to reason. One can only assume. It's only logical that."
Yeah, and it's only logical is a ridiculous phrase. What do you mean it's only logical? When I was in high school, I had this teacher named Celeste Van Dorp, and I owe her seriously because she pounded into us the concept of multiple causation.
Right.
And that's a that's a worldview changer, particularly to a teenager. Now, it's almost never happens. One thing causes another. No, it's a lot of stuff that causes a lot of stuff. And if you're just looking at one track, you're not seeing the forest for the trees.
Right. But of course, since we spend so much of our lives reading and making up comic book stories, we especially are prone to want to have a very straightforward cause and effect. You know.
Oh, of course. Did you find Jack Ruby's rocket ship?
Yes. Yes, but it's on eBay. You can find it on my eBay page. There was some question I was answering there, but I can't. Ask me that if you have it written down. Ask me whatever that last question was. It was actually.
Well, again, we're talking about when you came out of it. You know, I think we've gone through like how you felt going in, but when you came out,
yeah, I guess.
Sure.
And I know it's not an answer, but it did just remind me that that a lot of the story, I guess, if Stan Lee's story, right? My fascination, I don't know about Mike, but my fascination with a lot of the creators of the comic books of my childhood, the Julie Schwartzes, the Stan Lees, the Will Eisners, has to do with the fact that my parents are from that exact same background, and
right.
So for me, obviously the stories are the stories. Then when you start to learn the history, you go, huh, these people probably went to high school with my aunts and uncles, and so in some weird way, telling Stan Lee's story was sort of telling my parents' story in some weird way. I mean, maybe that's my obsession. Jack Ruby's the same generation as my parents. It's a greatest generation story gone horribly wrong. The same neighborhood that Jack Ruby grew up in. His best friend Barney Ross, the boxer.
Yep.
Goldberg, Benny Goodman, William S. Paley, Jack Ruby. That's so.
And my father went to high school or to school with them, with almost everybody you just mentioned. Justice Goldberg too.
Right. I mentioned Goldberg. Yeah, but
yeah.
I guess when you write about people of that generation, you're going to find people who dated them, who were their children, who were their that a lot of that history is still alive, or the children of those people. So I mean, I spoke to Ruby's niece, and he had a lot of nieces and nephews, but most of them are not that interested in parading before the public that they're Jack Ruby's niece and nephew. Two of them finally, were willing to talk about it. There was one who, even when he was interviewed before, never gave his actual first name. Imagine this: you're 12 years old. Your name is Ruby. You live in Dallas. You've been telling all your friends that your uncle owns a strip club because you're 12 years old.
Sure. Right.
Right.
That's right.
Right. So this is this thing that kind of you feel you're very cool and very daring. And then your crazy uncle shoots Lee Harvey Oswald on television. And how do you go to school the next day? So that's the kind of stuff I was looking for. I'm not smart enough to solve the mysteries of the Kennedy assassination, but I wanted to shed some light on this guy who really is just he's just that photo. He's just that, or those two photos. Depends if you want to pay a royalty or not. One of the because one of the photo. I mean, I learned a lot about having both for all my books, having to research photos. You learn a lot about what images you think are in the public domain are not in the public domain.
Yeah. Yeah. History is not necessarily in the public domain. You'd think otherwise, but no, that's not the case. You get a lot of cease and desist letters.
Yes, at least that means somebody's paying attention. Yeah, there's the second before he shoots him. That's one photo, and then of course the most famous one is of the actual shot. And then there's been a million riffs on it. That one, of course, somebody drew one of Oswald with a guitar, and it's a
Oh, I love that one.
yeah. Well, it's pretty clever. They're very dark. So that was my intention. The confounding and the fascinating and the thing about both Ruby and Oswald is they were both nuts. Whether they were lone nuts, of course, is the question.
Right.
But they were, they have histories of being crazy going back to childhood, and including Oswald spending 2 years in the Bronx and being examined by every social worker in the Bronx. That's a part of the story. When I thought I might tell a wider ranging story, and I'm so glad I didn't, because Ruby was enough. But there was there's just a lot of stuff, and then you get back to we mentioned Weekend at Bernie's, but Ruby was in show business. He was maybe not in the most high class and refined part of show business, but there's all sorts of people, celebrities that we know of who've spoken about working for this weird guy, Jack Ruby. And then, 3 months later, a year later, oh, that guy, So, Jack Ruby, the last guy to give Hank Williams regular work. When
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a, and I don't mean to make light of it. Obviously, it's a very serious and profound thing that we still reverberates today. But I just felt like, well, let me just dig in and see who this guy was. What was his milieu? Who loved him, who hated him? Like Citizen. It's Citizen Kane, except maybe a little bit realer.
Maybe. It's funny. You mentioned the photos, the two photos of Jack killing Lee. We're all on a first name basis here. So I'm going to bring this back to DC Comics, of course. When Time and Warner's merged, sort of, that allowed us, those from Warner's, to go over to the Time Life building on 50th and 6th Avenue to go to their cafeteria. Now, very few people knew this, and those of us who did it weren't snitching, because their cafeteria was great and it was cheap. The food was really good, and we went there in a heartbeat, just bammo. And on the corridor to their cafeteria, Time Life owned the Zapruder film. They owned it at that moment. So they had all these huge blow-ups of stills from the Zapruder film. You're walking down this corridor with all these photographs of Kennedy getting his head blown off, and then you eat lunch.
Yeah. Well,
that was a weird experience.
Just up on the wall as decorations?
Yeah, I'm serious.
Yeah, no, I believe it.
I know.
And of course, there are theories that the Zapruder film was tampered with and altered, and and another person I spoke to who's written a whole book about it herself. Actually, is Zapruder's granddaughter.
Oh yeah,
called 26 Seconds, and she, again, if say, if 12-year-old Ruby nephew's life was affected, well, imagine. The effect that film had on that family was profound. It just, it's called the fucking Zapruder film. It would be like it was called the Fingeroth film. It's like people would know that anybody with that name was probably somehow related. So this has been like a burden that the family has had to deal with since that day too.
Sure.
Did you ever meet Boris Karloff's daughter?
No. Was she a comics person, or how would I?
No, but she does a lot of. She was in San Diego the last couple of years, and she's done a lot of popular culture shows.
Because there's.
I'm sorry.
Isn't she a comic person now?
I still
Is
can't
it a
hear
good
you.
thing?
Maybe I'm just going deaf here.
Bob's microphone or the reset or the connection or something.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I see.
I said
I was trying to read his lips.
too much hair.
Uh,
No, I
she's
think she's now like she's there's the gold key stuff that she's done
That's
licensing.
true. She's promoting that. She looks a lot like her father,
Uh-huh.
which one might not say is a compliment necessarily. I think she looks fantastic, but I've never seen her, in person. So there's always that like, well, if you're going to be hung with the name Karloff or Zapruder or whatever, you're not going to live it down. And quite frankly, there isn't necessarily something that you have to live down, even for Ruby's family. Oswald's another matter, but Ruby, probably not. You killed Oswald. Oh, cool.
Well, there are a lot of Rubies, though. I mean, being Ruby is not necessarily being related to him, except at that time in Dallas then. But the best one, though, I think, is Bela Lugosi Jr. He's a big.
He's a lawyer.
Imagine walking into court and your opponent, the opposing lawyer, is Bela Lugosi Jr.
He's the guy that's going to save acting from AI. The laws he got passed in California
Oh, good.
for actors to retain their likeness rights is going to become the major weapon, assuming the strike thing doesn't work out. It'll become the major weapon in limiting the use of AI in using likeness rights in AI.
Good.
So Bella Jr., who I don't think he ever really met his father, but he got the rights to his father's image and then turned around and did it for the Three Stooges. My hero.
I want to turn a little bit.
Okay.
I want to kind of. We're going to make a nice turn here. So, can you talk a bit about your relationship with Stan Lee and how that evolved over time? Because he wrote forwards for your books. I mean, obviously you worked for Marvel for a really long time, and then you wrote his biography. So, how did that work? How did that relationship evolve?
Interestingly, I got to know him much better when I left Marvel.
Sure.
When I came to Marvel, I mean, I guess my first boss, I was hired by Larry Lieber, Stan's brother.
Mm-hmm. Now explain why you said that. Explain that.
What? What do you mean?
Oh, about the Atlas Comics.
A different name. But Stan changed his name and Larry didn't. I mean, that.
Well, no. The thing is, when Martin Goodman, who owned Marvel and then sold it to a bunch of people who he thinks screwed them, and maybe they did, he started up Atlas Seaboard Comics.
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, that's
and he hired Jeff Roven and Larry Lieber to run the company.
right.
And Larry had this editorial in his first issues of all of his books, a little drawing of him that he drew, saying, "Hi, I'm Larry Lieber, Stan Lee's brother." And ever since that time, everybody, at least of my generation, which means your generation, referred to Larry for 10 years at least as Larry Lieber, Stan Lee's brother.
I didn't know. Do you know that he drew that caricature? Because people have been trying to figure out forever who drew that.
I don't know, but knowing how Martin Goodman spent money, my guess is that Larry. I mean, Roy would probably know, but Larry probably drew it himself.
Anyway, so Larry hired me in 1970. But here's the weird you say about the Atlas Seaboard. A giant, beautiful omnibus came out that came in the mail, the What If omnibus from Marvel.
Oh, yeah.
Since I wrote a good share of them, I get one of the big bios in the flap, which, again, very flattering. However, somebody got their information from Wikipedia. It says that I started my career at Atlas Seaboard, which, no matter how many times I have people corrected on Wikipedia, always goes back. People think because I started out working for Larry, I worked at Atlas Seaboard. No, I worked for Larry when he came back to Marvel and was the head of the British department. Anyway, so I'm saying, so I would certainly see Stan when he and Larry interacted now and then. But Stan was spending a lot of his time on the West Coast, and soon thereafter moved to the West Coast. So I did a few, especially if there was an anniversary Spider-Man issue or something, and there was that big deal Spider-Man annual that he scripted. But I didn't see him much. But then once I left Marvel, I was the guy who knew Stan, whatever company I went to. And also when Marvel was in transition during the like 94, 95, during that whole crazy restructuring, which is when I decided to leave, Stan was being marginalized too. You know, the corporate upheaval was such. So I allowed myself to be sent on a trip to the West Coast, specifically to look for a job while I was there, and you know, and to do what the actual assignment was. But so I had dinner with Stan and Joan, and so from then I went to work for Byron Price, who was friends with Stan, and every company I went to, I was the guy who had Stan's phone number and email, and you know, and had access. So I got to know him more and more in those years after Marvel, oddly enough, and then I became his regular moderator at the Wizard World shows. When I did Right Now magazine for Tomorrow's, I interviewed him a lot, and Roy and I did that Stanley Universe book where I went to his archives, where he called me while I'm at the archives. You know, Stanley is calling. Oh shit, am I not supposed to be here? Is there stuff I'm not supposed to see?
Yeah, really.
Actually, there was. I mean, those archives are remarkably unredacted. It's worth a trip to Laramie, Wyoming. It actually is. It's a great archive, but especially if you want to see Mort Weisinger's archives or Jack Benny's or Barbara Stanwyck's. So I get on.
I only met one of those people aside from Stan, but I would want to see Jack Benny's. You bet.
Yeah, well, it's a great. There's a lot of reason that stuff is in that particular place, but Stan says to me, they wanted to specialize in comic book editors, and so Stan, you should give them your archives. I said, well, I'd like to, Stan. There's only one problem. They're in Laramie, Wyoming. No offense to anybody watching in Laramie, Wyoming. You have to take a plane that's nicknamed the Vomit Comet to get to this archive.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah. So I was never in Stan's inner circle. You know, if Stanley had a problem, he wasn't calling me for advice. But I did get to know him. I think I was, you know, I'm sure there are people out who are listening to this who will blanch and gag when I say this, but I think I was in many ways the right person to write a reasonably objective biography of Stan.
Okay.
Because he was not I mean, yes, I worked for Marvel, and yes, the love-hate that we all have with the company, you know, a lot of the love goes back to the relationship I had with Stan through the bullpen bulletins when I was 12 years. Having said that, I do think that I was able to talk about his flaws and foibles without dramatic music and neon signs. But I think I put the information there. Make of it what you will. I know there are at least half a dozen people I've blocked on Facebook who don't agree with that.
Oh, only a half dozen? I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Right now, this moment, there's an enormous amount of shade being thrown at Stan. Now, I'm not suggesting that is not justified or that these stories are not true. I don't think all of these stories are true, because that's just how mythology works. But I believe enough of them are true, and I believe guys like Kirby and Wood and those folks who people are citing now as references. Why do you think, though, that at this moment in time, in 2023, people are going like, "Oh, we're going to get that Stan Lee guy"? Why now?
Here's my theory. I don't know if you were setting me up for this answer or not.
No.
When I was on the publicity tour for the Stan book at the LA stop, a brilliant college professor named Charles Hatfield asked me more or less that question during the Q&A, and I came up with what I thought was such an answer. I thought it was reasonably intelligent, so I'm repeating it now. everybody's got a story about some guy who screwed their father, somebody who did your father dirt. And if that hadn't happened, you'd be wealthy and on easy street, and your dad wouldn't have been so bitter and miserable. And that guy, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby fills the role of the father who got screwed, and Stan Lee is the perfect movie villain to be the guy who, had this very complicated relationship with Martin Goodman, who was his cousin and his boss, and that relationship was even more complicated than I even knew. But I think that's it. Everybody's got a story about somebody who took advantage of and abused their father, and I think it happens to a lot of I just think it's a common mythology or story that families hand down. Maybe I'm revealing too much about myself here, but that. But I just think that I think so. I think, and also the other thing is Stan is conveniently dead. So
that helps. That helps a lot. You can libel the dead if you get their family involved.
That's true.
So if you stay away from the family, you're okay. You know who had the worst stuff? Well, because you and I have talked about this, Bob. You know who had the worst stuff to say about Stan, and he never said it in public.
No,
well,
it wasn't Jack.
Who?
Steve.
Steve Ditko. Now, Steve wasn't mean about it. He was actually frighteningly matter of fact about it.
But did Steve have anything good to say about anybody?
Yeah.
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 Other than Anne Rind?
He was mostly a good guy, unless you started to get towards that sort of objectivism stuff, and then you're debating the Pope.
Again, as you would not be surprised from a guy who wrote a book called Superman on the Couch. I tend to, psychoanalyze these things. I think, and I didn't know, I had the honor of having Steve Ditko actually draw a couple of my stories. But again, researching it, reading what Steve said, sort of, that seemed to me like a guy disappointed in a friend that maybe he and Stan had actually had they weren't going to hang out together. Their lifestyles and personals, Stan was not going to dinner with Steve Ditko. But I think professionally, I think you can look at those amazing fantasy stories and even how Stan and Steve create. There's a certain amount of love there, at least I think from both ways, but at a certain point, I think Ditko,
I think I get what you're saying.
I was going to say,
you must be familiar with the group, with the duo, Sam and Dave.
Yeah,
they hated each other, and I don't mean hated each other. I mean hated each other, except for when they were on stage, I assume, or in the studio. They hated each other so much that their wives, to this very day, hate each other and won't stand on stage with one another. That happens. They did phenomenal work together. The trick is they knew it. They knew which side of the bread had the butter.
Look, I mean, Ditko was willing to leave, and don't you think in some way Kirby might have either knew it or feared it, and that's why he didn't leave for so long? I don't know. I mean, I
think that Jack is a much more complicated guy than we give credit for.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And towards the end of
nothing I said is meant to cast shade on Jack Kirby, who I don't
No. Jack is God, but in the latter days of his life, his memory wasn't quite so good, and he had a lot of that anger that was clearly being built up for years started coming out. I mean, he literally got to. Well, of course, he was being egged on by Frank Miller, but at the San Diego one year, he just eviscerated Stan, and demanded everybody knew that nobody ever wrote a Jack Kirby story other than Jack Kirby.
Yeah, well,
And I will agree with that if you have a very unpopular definition of the word wrote.
mhm.
You know?
Look, Stan was highly flawed, and I mean, you can say he was a ruthless careerist, but you can say that about almost everybody you've ever heard of, because if they weren't ruthless careerists, you wouldn't have heard about them.
I didn't grow up during the Depression and then go to war.
I will say I had a great sort of compliment once. When Abraham Reisman's book came out, which, as you know, is kind of a bit negative on
Is that the
Stan.
new one?
Well, not so new anymore. It's
A couple of years.
Yeah, a couple of years. We did your friend Charlie Meyerson show. We did Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go Chicago Town Hall, Chicago
Public Square.
Public Square.
Yeah.
And I think, and Charlie was really hoping we'd get into a big argument. And I kind of was too, because I thought it would sell books. I'm the guy that timed my paperback to come out with his hardcover. So that Amazon would say, if you like this, you'll like that.
Right.
So Abraham says to me, one thing I learned, it was very complimentary. He said, I learned something important from your book, Danny. He said, whatever Stan was guilty of, compared to the other editors of his generation, he was a saint.
Yeah. Yeah. People said the same thing about the Chess Brothers. So I get that. By the way, just to put a footnote on that, Charlie Meyerson, who's one of my oldest friends and dearest friends, wonderful guy.
All that is true.
Got his start, sort of, drawing front pages for Newfangles, which is Don and Maggie Thompson's fanzine. And then later on, after that, a couple of years, he did this historical thing for me at First Comics. It was a 6-part text feature about sort of the history of the underground comics and alternative comics and all of that. He did a brilliant job. And then we worked him into a Hawkman story. John Ostrander and I worked him into a Hawkman story. It was, he's a great, 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 great guy. I swear, we should have him on just to show people what a fanboy can do with his life.
Yeah.
Charlie's great.
I think I had a thought and it went out of my head. But about Stan was complicated. I was going to say, people. What I find interesting is that people who love Stan and people who hate Stan don't describe him very differently.
Sure.
Some people love that kind of guy, and some people hate that kind of guy.
I mean, it's interesting because from my perspective, my first experience with Stan was listening to him narrate Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and from what I know of comics and just how comics are made, there's always relationship problems. I mean, one of the best comics Mike ever made, the writer and the artist couldn't stand each other when they were working on it. So it doesn't mean that good comics don't come out of it. And there's
I see the expression on your face.
You're like, what is that? It's a question.
No. I was just going to say, I think one thing that especially happens with comic book people, especially Marvel, DC people, is although Stan and Jack and Steve taught us that heroes can have feet of clay, we do want to have a good guy and a bad guy in every situation. We want to have like you were saying, what's Jack Ruby's origin? I have a bunch of answers to that, but having to deal with their different traumas in his childhood. But
no, it's the same, exactly the same as Superman's origin. Mr. and Mrs. Ruby got drunk one night
Comic book people are storytellers. And
I see your knowledge of Kryptonian biology is suspected, Mike.
I worked at DC for 9 years, so
no, you're right. Comic book people are storytellers, and they want to tell the story. It's an art. It's something I discovered recently, or came across this concept that there's people are always talking about how comics are ending, and or somebody's place in comics is ending, and they're all storytellers, and they're trying to find the end to the story. Whether it's true or not. That's
comics are healthier than ever. They're just not superhero comics. They're manga and Raina Telgemeier and Dan Doug Pilkey, and there's more people reading comics now probably than ever.
Sure.
Well, yeah, I think that's true, and there's a wider variety of American comics than ever, and that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. But we've had comics in the form that we know them now for like 85 years.
Right.
That doesn't mean they won't disappear tomorrow. They could. How was that last episode of The Lone Ranger you heard on the radio? But things do go away. But the idea of visual storytelling evolves like everything else does, and it will continue to evolve in comics. The lucky part is I don't have to figure out the next step.
That's true.
Well, right now we're I listen to like everybody, I listen to podcasts, but of course I'm going, oh, this is radio. Special. The greatest thing about the podcasting era is, I don't know, somehow we've gotten back to celebrity hosts doing their own commercials.
Yes.
Which is so weird. People who you would think have the clout to say, I'm not shilling this thing. It's like, no, I'm going to read this commercial for this therapy service. That what could be less than above board about a dial-in therapy, whatever.
It's funny. That's a brilliant point, Danny, because yesterday I was discussing what SiriusXM has done to me. Now, I'm an old radio broadcaster, among other things, and SiriusXM, in particular, Little Stephen's Underground Garage, is the only last living element of American rock and roll radio broadcasting. So there.
Okay, Wolfman Jack is gone, even though Bob Dylan reincarnated him. Oh, that's my other thing is I'm dipping my toes in Bob Dylan scholarship. So
yeah, good luck.
Yeah, well,
listen, that's in the intro.
Yeah.
The book.
Yeah. Dylan, I don't know how many mob hits he's had.
Well, he's in the music business, so
yeah, so it's possible. Sure, that gets us over to Valiant Comics now, doesn't it?
I think that gets us over more mainstream than, I think there might have been more than a little mob involvement over the years in our beloved superhero industry.
Yeah. How else do you get paper during World War II? How else do you get gasoline for the distribution trucks? How else did Walter Annenberg get his start?
In Chicago.
That's right. He became ambassador to the Court of St. James, to England. His
Annenberg biographies. How many do you have?
I'm sorry?
I own 2 Annenberg biographies. How many do you have?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe more than 2. Probably more than 2.
Probably more than 2. I'm sure if anybody would, it would be you.
Yeah, probably true. Charlie might.
Listen, having you on though, Danny, I want to talk a little bit about your time in comics.
Okay.
When you were writing and editing for Marvel, you worked on some really incredible books, and a lot of them, and I don't know if you know this, have had a lasting impact on fans of a certain generation and a whole generation of people who went on to make comics. You have no idea how many creators of my age or a little bit younger list Darkhawk as their favorite comic. They are,
you know, it's
and I'm just saying. And so, and also in the things that I showed you in the intro, like when you were editing Spectacular Spider-Man, that was my first Spider-Man. Like those issues, when I was drawing them and then writing them, and you were editing, that was my introduction to Spider-Man. And how do you feel about that work that you did there? And then I have one other question.
okay. You know, it's. I appreciate you saying that. I mean, obviously the book sold well at the time. It's. I was aware that although comics were maturing and there was Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and all and those brilliant people, I was playing in the superhero sandbox. And so my own personal way to evaluate something would be, how would 10-year-old Danny have reacted to this story point or this or this character development or something. So because it's right. I mean, there's that old cliche, and that never stopped me before. The golden age of anything is 12. So
Sure.
I look back on some of the stuff, and I think it was terrific. I look back on some of it, and I'm embarrassed to even be reading it. I think, how do I feel? I shouldn't be so tongue-tied. You would think I've had that question before, but I actually haven't. In that quite formed quite that way. How do you feel?
You're stalling.
Yeah, I am.
Well, Mike, do you know one of the people that I'm talking about? One of the people that I'm talking about, Mike.
Really trying to say?
I'm
what
sorry.
am I really trying to say, Dr. Gold? Tell me.
Say again?
Dr. Gold, what am I trying to say?
I don't know what you're trying to say, but you're not saying it.
I know.
Well, I'm going to give him time because I'm going
Go be
to shout out.
humble. It's okay. You can be humble. It's all right. It took me years to learn how to be humble, and I'm no damn good at it now, but at least I know it's a thing.
There's an aspect of working in the comic book business where you take on the qualities of a battered spouse. I really thought that I was going to be in. I thought I was going to be in comics and at Marvel my entire. After you do it for like close to 20 years, you go, I guess this is what I do.
Right.
And the people.
And these are conversations I've had with other people of your age,
Yeah.
Who were all of a sudden not doing work anymore that they thought they were going to be doing. I want you to know, and I think that's the point of my question is that the work you did at the time was appreciated by the people who read it, and those some of the people who read it said, "This is what I want to do."
Well, thank you, because I mean that was, and I'm sure Mike, shares this. I hope, that was my fondest hope that whatever the joy I got out of that stuff as a kid, that I could bring to another generation or three of children. And I know that I was doing Spider-Man, so a lot of actual children were reading it. So that was thank you.
Let us remember that when we're writing superhero comics for adults or producing them on any level, we're doing it. We're writing for that inner 12-year-old of that adult.
Right.
The inner 12-year-old that's been paying your rent and my rent all of these years. That's who we're writing for. So it doesn't matter if you're 12 or if you're 42 or 82. I mean, I knew Jerry Bales until the end of his life, and he was a Justice Society League fan, Justice Society League, Society of America fan from until the day he died.
I mean,
he was that same guy.
I went to there was a memorial for John Romita the other night that they showed. I was very pleased to be invited. It was by invite only, and a lot of people who should have been there were not invited because either they were forgotten or didn't know, whatever it was. So it was a room full of about maybe 50 people, all, and maybe 3 of them still worked at Marvel, and the other 47 people no longer did, not by their own choice. Not that they were even fired, I mean, because I like to. It's ridiculous, but I like to clear the record. I did not. I resigned from Marvel. I was not fired or laid off. Blah blah blah. Who cares? Me. Um, that was a room full of people who love Marvel comics and love John Romita and came to this event and didn't. Nobody got drunk and started a fight, but they didn't. Somehow things evolved where we ended up not being there, and it's a very weird thing. So that I have this great love of comics, and I spent many years every time the phone rang thinking they're calling me to come back and save them. It's about time, I only think that now. Only every other phone on the phone ring. But thank you. I appreciate being appreciated.
Yeah, sometimes you lose sight of the fact that what you do, what your name is on, has an influence, matters to people, even if all they're doing is reading it and having a great time. Well, quite frankly, that's the purpose. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
I got one more quick hit.
Okay.
How would you feel about it? It's very popular in the news and it's a topic. How would you feel about Taylor Swift being Dazzler in the Marvel Universe?
Oh, she was born to be Dazzler.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's been it's.
I say, let me say right here, Taylor, go for it.
I wonder. With the strike and all that, with the strikes and all that, she might be a little past her prime by the time.
There's a huge fan theory because now she's dating Travis Kelce, and when she was at the game in the booth was Ryan Reynolds, and Hugh Jackman was there, and the director of Deadpool was of the new Deadpool movie 3 was there, and they're like, maybe she'll show up in Deadpool 3 as Dazzler, and then boom, right into the MCU.
That would be perfect. I got a question for you guys.
Yeah.
If you were casting Jack Ruby, what popular modern actor would you cast as Jack Ruby?
Ooh, damn! I would have the perfect answer if you asked me 20 years ago. That would be Ed Asner.
That would be Ed Asner, right?
Yeah, Ed Asner could really pull that off. But today,
I like the guy who played him in Umbrella Academy, though I can't think of his name, but he was very good.
Yeah, I can't think of.
I don't know who that was.
How old was
Leonardo could do a good job at it.
Ruby was 52 when he shot Oswald and 55 when he died.
I think DiCaprio could do a good job of it.
Who? DiCaprio?
Yep.
Maybe.
He does everything, but he's just a very good actor, and he's the right age right now.
I think that's probably true. I keep on seeing him as the guy who's in the Scorsese movies,
right?
And I don't think that's right. But I agree with you
because I retained the rights to that. There was one guy who I thought, even though he was a little old, would be appropriate, but that was. I'd rather not go into. There was somebody who I thought would be good, but that negotiation didn't pan out as I had hoped.
Well, I'm going to withdraw my question. I don't want to know because ultimately I would like to go see this movie. So there you go.
Me too. But actually, that guy who played him in the season 2 of Umbrella Academy, I thought was actually. I think they did. I thought they did justice to Jack in that series.
How do you feel about Jack Ruby as a human being? You know the guy.
Yeah. I just don't. I'm just trying to think if that's the nonfiction equivalent of a spoiler alert.
Well, wow.
I'm going to turn it just a little bit. See if we can answer it this way.
Yeah. Because I do have my feelings have changed, and I do have them, but I just don't know if I don't know if I want to lead a reader and sort of prejudice people before they've even read the book. So
Oh,
If
boy.
I'll talk.
answer this,
I'll talk to you about that after the recording is done. But
if you can
I
answer
see
this,
another bowl of chicken soup in my future.
and this was kind of the last question that I kind of had for us because we've been going somewhat, and I really appreciate it. But what do you hope
it's so
that
hard for me
people?
to talk about myself. It's just
Exactly. Don't worry about it. What do you hope that people who are familiar with Kennedy assassination and the aftermath will take from this book? What do you
Oh,
hope that people?
wow. Huh. What will they take? That. Oh boy. You know, this is what you get for being my inaugural interview. What do I
Oh,
hope?
there you go.
For? That history is more complicated than we think, even when it's something. Uh, but but that's too simple. I don't like that. Edit that answer out. That is a boy. Wow. What do I want people to take away?
Well, I mean, people, you wrote the book. What do you want them to do? You want them to read the book and just say, "Oh, good." Is there something you want them to just walk away with?
I hope it makes people want to know more about history and not just take what they hear on whatever their network of choice is or their podcast of choice, but maybe, look at it in its complexity, and maybe bring that awareness to the voting booth. Ooh, I got heavier than I.
Wow, that was
Whoa.
a really good answer. No, I'm serious. That was great. I was wondering how you were going to get out of that one,
Me too. Me too.
and you did a wonderful job. So,
Well,
And on that note,
this is
what
one
do
of
you think of the spot?
this is one of the gifts of working at Mike, as you know, and Bob, I'm not sure of your background, but working in corporate life, you suddenly learn. You go to a meeting, and especially after Marvel, when I would be at smaller companies where I really had to take a bigger role in sort of corporate things and just public facing things, you learn to think on your feet.
yeah.
Just
Yep.
I had one guy I worked with who would just like throw us, to say, this is an important meeting. Follow my lead, and then he walk out of the room. Like, okay. And it's not that what I said, it's not that. I mean, I think what I said actually reflects what I feel. But until you asked it, I didn't know that. So
That's awesome. I love that. But I'll give you. I know what you're saying. Try hosting a panel with Steve Root. So there you go.
Try sitting next to Steve on the panel. I enjoyed the panel, so I'm not going to bitch about it. But the Steve Root panel at Baltimore was unique, and it was very good.
It was good, but Mike and I walked in and like, what do you want me to say? Like, just introduce me.
Yeah, right,
And then we let him go. And then he threw a question at us. We're like,
right. We're
Well,
running a little late, folks. So good night.
when working with Wizard, as Mike knows, I worked for them for 4 years, and they hired me. They basically hired me to do weird panels.
awesome.
And I took them up on it. And I guess my philosophy about panels came to be, if it's a great panel, people are going to go, that was a great panel. And if it's a terrible panel, they'll go, oh, that panel, you should have been there. That was so funny. Those guys are such idiots. You want to give people something to talk about one way or the other, either something great or something terrible.
We could compare panel hosting experiences.
I'm,
All three of us. I've had some really strange experiences and some really wonderful experiences. It's show business.
well,
You're
can I repeat
you're entertaining people.
one of maybe my favorite Stan Lee panel story? Just to bring it back.
It's good.
Maybe it's a good way to Stan, it was in Sacramento. Were you at that show, Mike, in Sacramento? Were you at that? I'll
I
tell you,
don't think so.
Stan, I was his regular moderator at the Wizard shows. And they said, and I have no reason to think this was not true, Stan had gotten a flu shot and was having a bad reaction. Get your flu shots, people. This is not an anti-flu shot. And so instead of coming on Saturday, they sent a plane for him, and he came on Sunday.
Wow.
he didn't look very good. This was before he got really sick, so he was still, and I mean, he was like, struggling to walk up the steps of the stage. And the head honcho at Wizard gave a little preamble. He said, Stan not feeling well, had a bad reaction to the shot. He didn't want to disappoint you guys. Maybe he didn't want to breach his contract with Wizard. I don't know, but he didn't want to disappoint you guys. But he's only going to do 20 minutes, not the usual 45. So I hope you understand that he's making this giant Herculean effort. And here's Stan and Danny. We go up, and Stan does his usual shtick. I think he went pretty early to answering. I had a couple of questions for him. Then he went to the question. Stan really, and he's perking up. Like any old or sick person I've ever done a panel with. The minute they're on stage, right? So, and the Wizard people, the convention people, they're flashing me, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, end it. So I go, okay. I say to Stan, well, Stan, as John explained, you've been under the weather, and so we're only doing a 20-minute panel. Is there anything you want to say to your fans before we leave? And Stan says, "Is God talking to you? Did he say we have to stop? I feel great. Let's keep going." Everybody is freaking out backstage. Stan's handlers, the Wizard people, the venue people. They're flashing me signs. I don't know what they mean.
That middle finger thing, you can figure that out.
It went beyond the finger thing. It was just so we did about another 10 minutes, but that was one of the better unexpected things that happened at a panel. But yeah, that you're working without a net. You're working live with zany creative people who might do and say anything.
Yeah. Okay, here's the segue from hell. What you just said reminds me of a story about Cab Calloway.
Of course it does.
Of course. I'd seen Cab work a couple of times live. I was really lucky. And one time I had seats sort of up close, but all the way off to the side. So I got to see him in the wings. And his daughter was there performing because, he was about 2,000 years old. So he had to, he'd sing a couple of songs and then sit down off stage. But I could see him off stage. And I thought when he was off stage, he was dead. He just looked totally out. And then he got his cue and he got up and he was Cab Calloway. And I mean, we've seen that before. We see it on television, live television and stuff every once in a while where, Groucho Marx went through the same thing when he did Carnegie Hall. And that's great. But that shows you what that public adulation does for you and how entertaining the masses is a two-way street. The entertainer gets stuff back.
Oh, yeah.
From the audience. And that's true for all of us who've hosted panels or doing podcasts or writing comics or drawing comics. We're all in the entertainment business. And I'm getting old, so watch it.
Amen.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being here, Danny. It was great talking to you. We're really looking forward to the book. As I said, I'm not finished with it, but I've started it, and it's very entertaining. It's really.
I've read it. I haven't looked at the pictures.
Oh, the pictures are as you might imagine. There's a certain amount of visual sensibility I bring to it, so I pick the pictures very carefully.
Yeah,
and you had to pay for them.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on, guys. This was great fun. Thank you,
Danny. It's great. I've been wanting you on this thing ever since Bob asked me to join up. So, and also I want another corned beef sandwich. So what the hell?
I think we're way overdue.
That's it.
And let's bring Bob along too. He can come up from.
Sure, it's only a 3-hour train
from Baltimore. Yeah, there's no good corned beef in Baltimore. So
and it's easy parking in Manhattan. So just.
Danny, thank you very much. You can tell folks that Danny and I are friends. And I have to tell you, we all got a lot of friends, but Danny is special. So thanks for coming here.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye. Right back at you, Mike.
All right. Ha!
Well, we did it. We did our first recorded podcast, SquadCast, and we're going to be back soon. So make sure, again, I just want to remind everybody to like and follow this account on YouTube, because when you do that, you'll know that we're going to be live. We're going to be live very soon. We have some people lined up. We're going to miss Halloween because, people are doing stuff. But we'll be right back, and we'll be locked and loaded for the rest of the year. So thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Take it easy, folks.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?